नमस्कार। जंग छेड़ चुका है और इसके बारे में हम आपसे गुफ्तगू करेंगे। You will remember that in our very first podcast in this series, Money Talk, that was on the 31st of January, we had predicted that war between the United States and Israel on the one hand and Iran on the other was imminent. And as predicted by us, on the Saturday, the 28th of February, war began between the US and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. The United States Defense Secretary, Mr. Pete Hegseth, has described the American attack on Iran as the most complex, the most lethal, and the most precise aerial operation in history. And the United Nations Secretary General has warned that what has been unleashed is a chain of events that no one can control. That is how serious the situation is today, this Sunday, which is the second day of the war. My podcast on the 31st of January began by referring to the situation as it obtained on the eve of the First World War and the Second World War. Today I would emphasize that, saying that the assassination of Supreme Leader Khamenei is the 21st century equivalent of the assassination of the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie, which sparked the First World War, which in turn led to the Second World War. That is how serious the situation is. Even as Russia then backed up Serbia, which was a fellow Slav country, today the main result of the attack on Iran is that the Federation of Russia has become vulnerable in an even greater way than the expansion of NATO into Ukraine. Because if you look at a map, you'll find that the southern border of the Russian Federation, including the Commonwealth states like Azerbaijan, run along the southern soft underbelly of the Russian Federation. And as far as China is concerned, it is the single largest source of energy for the Chinese economic miracle is the oil and gas that they get from Iran. So their entire future as a major economic power is threatened by this attempt by the United States to occupy Iran and undertake regime change there. This means that Russia and China are being willy-nilly dragged into the war between Iran and on the one hand and the United States and Israel on the other hand. And in these circumstances, we see that the US has killed Supreme Leader Khamenei, but there has been a smooth succession. The Vice President of Iran, Mohammad Reza Aref, has taken over. A 40-day mourning has been declared. There is no disruption of civil government in Iran. The army remains completely loyal to the Iranian government. And what we have to ask ourselves is, what is it that has led to this conflict to this warlike situation which is threatening the Third World War, which will be far, far more deadly than the first two world wars. Those took about 100 million lives. The Third World War, which will extend to this place from where I'm doing this podcast. It'll extend into Delhi, it'll extend all over the world, and will probably result in the complete wiping out of the human species. Why has this happened? There was until Friday the 27th, there were negotiations going on in Geneva which were being mediated by the Oman Foreign Minister, Mr. Al-Busali. And Al-Busali on the 27th, that is with a few hours to go for war to break out, for the Israelis to attack the compound in which Supreme Leader Khamenei was consulting with his principal advisors. At that moment, Mr. Al-Busali actually told an American interviewer that agreement on the nuclear weapons issue had almost been reached between the United States negotiators, Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, and the Iranian foreign minister, Mr. Aragachi. He said that it had been agreed by Iran that they would never ever become a nuclear weapon power. He said they had agreed that there would be zero accumulation of fissile material required to make nuclear weapons. He said there would be zero stockpiling of such fissile material, and that there would be unimpeded verification, not only by the International Atomic Energy Authority, but that access would be given even to US inspectors. In other words, the casus belli, the cause of war which Mr. Trump was advocating, namely the threat of Iran, which is a signatory, unlike India, to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968, that Iran would remain faithful to the pledges it had made under the NPT. So why did war suddenly break out that night at 2 a.m. Washington time and the early hours of the morning of the 28th of February Iran time? It broke out because Israel decided to sabotage the agreement that had almost been reached between the Iran foreign minister and the special envoys of the United States. The Israelis were so alarmed at the prospect of Iran being let off the hook that they decided to initiate hostilities by targeting a set of buildings where Supreme Leader Khamenei was talking to his defense minister, was talking to the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, and possibly other senior advisors. The attack was so ferocious on the part of Israel that Supreme Leader Khamenei was blown into smithereens. So was the defense minister. So was the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And so also were the bodies of others present on that meeting, were also blown into smithereens. And once Israel had taken this step, the United States was left with no alternative but to sabotage the very agreement that it was arriving at the previous day and joining the Israelis in attacking Iran. It was a classic case of the Israeli tail wagging the American dog. So it is incorrect to describe it as an US-Israel attack on Iran. It was actually an Israel-US attack on Iran. And they did it only because Israel was determined to avail of this opportunity to find an end to the one regime in West Asia which was standing up to the atrocities of Israel, the genocide that it is conducting in Gaza, the encroachments it is undertaking in the West Bank, the complete elimination of any possibility of a two-state solution, the actual physical elimination of all Palestinians, forcing the Palestinian identity to become part of the Arab identity of Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Jordan or wherever. So this attempt at erasing any sign of the Palestinian identity, which was being resisted more by Iran than by any of the other Arab countries, most of which are either vicious military dictatorships or they are monarchies. These countries who do not have any sanction from the Arab people are totally with the Palestinians. The Arab street, as it used to be called, is with the Palestinians. They realize that if Palestine is eliminated, there is nothing to stop Jewish hegemony over an Islamic territory. And an Islamic territory, even if it is divided between Sunnis and Shias, remains a Muslim territory. And a Muslim territory which has historically been extremely tolerant towards its Christian minority and its Jewish minority. This then is how wars start that could end the very existence of the human species. True, Khamenei is dead, but so in the past were killed Ngo Dinh Diem, a puppet of the United States, set up as president in South Vietnam. So also was killed Saddam Hussein, who was subverted by the US vice president into attacking Iran back in 1982. And then, more recently, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, who was brutally assassinated by agents sent by the Western powers. They all fell. They all were killed, like Khamenei has been killed. But there was chaos that has followed. In the case of Vietnam, that chaos was ended only after Ho Chi Minh's troops, after the death of Ho Chi Minh, succeeded in capturing all of Vietnam and creating one of the newest of the Asian tigers. Only because they've got rid of the Americans, but they have accepted US money to be able to become a virtually developed country. In a similar way, after Saddam Hussein was assassinated in a very cruel plot, after that there has been nothing but chaos in Iraq, largely between Sunni and Shia, but also egged on by various other elements who have been interfering in that country. And even now, Muqtada al-Sadr, who is the leader of the Shias in Iraq, which is a Shia majority country, has declared mourning in Iraq for the death of the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. So in these circumstances, we find that Libya is in total chaos, Tunisia is in complete chaos, So the Americans have never been able to achieve any kind of stability after undertaking regime change. However, Iran is a civilizational state. Alexander became Alexander only after he defeated the Persians. The Persians in the 4th century BC were the United States America were in the 21st century AD. They were the world's most powerful state. And although Alexander succeeded in defeating them, the continuity of Iranian civilization has continued all these centuries, and perhaps the biggest outside influence on India, on India's civilization, on India's culture, on India's painting, on India's architecture, has not been that of the British. It has been that of Iran. That is the country with whom we've had the deepest and longest civilizational contact, and until the British made English the language of administration and justice in India, India was ruled through the Persian language. That is the extent to which the Iran and India are the closest of civilizational neighbors. Now, this country has lost its major leader, the supreme leader, Khamenei. But has chaos followed? Has Iran been as easily knocked over as South Vietnam was, as Iraq was, as Libya was, as Tunisia was, as Egypt almost was? No, because Iran is not an easy knockover. It is a huge country compared to any of the others that I have mentioned as being the objects of US terrorism, state terrorism. So are there any possible successors to the Khamenei regime in case regime change just take place? There are many contenders. There is the pretender to the throne, Raza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah of Iran. He's so discredited that it is only in the eyes of Raza Pahlavi that Raza Pahlavi could become the successor to Khamenei. There are two former presidents who may be brought into the running, or who even may be in the running. They are President Rouhani and President Khatami. There's also a former Prime Minister. He is Mr. Musavi. And there are at least two sort of NGO or civil society activists who might be able to succeed. One of them is called Taj Zadeh. The other is the Nobel Prize winner, Nargis Mohammadi. But the opposition to the current regime, to the Islamic regime, is so scattered, is so divided, is so much at odds with each other that an Iranian origin observer of the Iranian scene has described the opposition as an archipelago of political islands. An archipelago of political islands. So there will be no following up to regime change in Iran except chaos. And Mr. Trump will then join the ranks of other failed US presidents, such as Lyndon Johnson, who was brought down by the war in Vietnam, such as Gerald Ford, who was also brought down by the war in Iran, by Jimmy Carter, who was brought down when he attempted regime change and the rescue of US hostages in Iran. Then there was George W. Bush, whose reputation was stained by his ludicrous invasion of Iraq when Saddam Hussein succeeded Saddam Hussein, and finally Joe Biden, who was brought down by his failed attempt at regime change in Afghanistan. So there are already demonstrations breaking out all over the United States, especially in Washington and New York, as also in several capitals of the world, including London and Paris, and of course here in India, particularly in Kashmir, but also in Delhi, which are showing that the world is not willing to accept a man called Donald Trump, as the hegemon of the world. King Donald is an emperor without clothes. There is a new axis of evil that has been drawn from Tel Aviv to Washington via Brussels. But the real tragedy for Indians is that Mr. Modi has visited Israel just before the outbreak of war for more than 24 hours. And what has he achieved? And why did he go? More importantly, what made him go? It seems to me, and it seems to a large number of other observers, that Mr. Modi went to Israel because he had been tipped off that war was about to start. And he went to Israel to demonstrate that he was with Israel and the United States in fighting against our civilizational partner, Iran. That is the tragedy, that Mr. Modi wants the axis of evil to also run through New Delhi in the land of Mahatma Gandhi. Satyameva Jayate. Namaskar. Jai Hind. Mahatma Gandhi Amar Rahe.